inequality. Inequality is fundamentally essential because you can't have human action in a world where we're all basically flattened into a line. There is no reason to act. No one would act. So even at like the most abstract theoretical level, communism and all of its cousins doesn't fucking work. It's never worked, not because it's good in theory but not in practice. There is no theory of communism that works.
Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We got a special guest today, John Papola. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff, but you asked me what the show's about, and for just in case there's any new listeners or viewers out there, I'll explain it again. We've organized this around a list of principles that I think are important to being a citizen, which is the name of the show. And if you look up the definition of the word, a citizen is someone with the rights and responsibilities conferred by citizenship, right? So we often talk about our rights. We very rarely lean into our responsibilities, in my opinion. We want things without having to pay for them, I guess, right? Which is not necessarily in a monetary sense, but we want things. We want results without work, I guess, in a lot of ways these days. It's a microwave culture, so
all benefits, no costs.
Yes, so that's what we're trying to address here. It's very personal. It's like positive. I guess you could call them affirmation statements. The first one is it's about supporting and defending the Constitution, basically. But we say liberty. So I took it from the oath of enlistment that you hear for military, politicians, police, and it's I'll support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I just changed the word Constitution to liberty in general, right? Because I think it's a little bit more broad. And then there's a litany of other ones after that, like I'll do something every day to help my country. My countrymen are all men. That I think is important. It's a lot of action phrases. Like, here are things I'm going to do to make my country great, which I think is a reasonable thing to do.
Hear, hear. I mean, I do a show called Dad Saves America, and I think about things in a very similar way, and I came into it through being a dad and through thinking about what does it mean to raise an adult in this age, in a time when, frankly, the culture doesn't have a shared vision of adulthood or healthy masculinity. And, you know, I think it's I don't know how you have liberty if you don't have a visceral understanding of its benefits and want to defend it because you know what it means, and you know and you earn that experience of liberty. You do have to earn it. You know, you aren't just given freedom and then you just do what you want. There's like a there's a war that's always at play, I think, when it comes to these things. And we've lived through such an ahistoric period of peace that I don't think, like, we're multi-generations into not really knowing what that means to have to defend the things we take for granted.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, we have, because of our some combination of our economic power, our military power, and the standoff of two oceans, have been able to become insular in a way that has allowed us to be the world's police without any real recourse, right? So, and on the one hand, we've overextended ourselves financially and militarily to a degree that I never would have thought possible, frankly. I mean, we're going to spend $1 trillion on defense this year. And then on the other side, have we made the homeland any safer in any real way? No, the answer is obviously no, right? So, from a functionality standpoint, you're absolutely correct. And I think the problem has been, and we can talk more about this, but I think the problem has been that we've not been able, not that we haven't had struggle, but we've not been able to define it in a way that, as you say, is historic, because our struggle has been ahistoric. It's been a very extended period of peace where I guess the primary threat has come from our own government for the most part, right? Because there is, and it's not because they've been so evil, although there was a coup in 1963 with the JFK assassination, in my opinion, that has extended all the way up until present, and that's why they hate Trump so much. But our government has sucked, but it hasn't been evil in the way that Mao's government was, or Stalin's government, or like all the evil rulers of Rome over the years and things like that. It's been quite a bit more.
It's soft despotism.
Soft despotism is a good way to put that. Yeah. So I think we've had a hard time putting our finger on the pulse of exactly what's wrong, right? Because it's, as you say, ahistoric. That's my opinion on that.
I think, it's funny, on the way over here, I was talking with my producer, Tim, about super high flying ideas about liberty and life. And I've been personally going through sort of a renewal in that, I was raised Catholic. I'm Italian descent. And I'm coming back to that tradition from personally, for real, like as a participant, as someone interested, and not just like someone who's received a thing from your parents and then just sort of keep doing it out of habit. And as somebody who first came into the political movement, if you will, through Ron Paul, it's challenging me, and these times are challenging, because if you put liberty as your highest value, I don't think the founders understood liberty to be the only value. They sort of understood that the liberty was in the service of a kind of a broader human project, and it's why I can't remember if it was Adams who said that the Constitution was fundamentally designed for a moral people, but I think that's true. And you can quibble over what did it mean to be moral, but the notion that you can have and maintain the things that we call like freedom, and not have some shared bigger picture for what the good life is supposed to be and what being a good neighbor is supposed to be. I think that one way that I think about this is like in just business interactions, right? So the Constitution, all of our laws, they're fundamentally legal documents, just like any other contract. They're not quite the same as a real voluntary contract, but they're like that. And whenever you do a deal, whether it's an employment agreement or hiring a subcontractor or hiring a builder to build your house, you can't write down every contingent thing that might go wrong and pre-adjudicate it.
That's why we use phrases like force majeure and stuff like that.
Right.
Sometimes shit happens. Right.
But even beyond like the totally unanticipated, you are assuming that both sides are coming to the table in good faith, and that there's 1,000, maybe even 1,000,000 variables that you're taking for granted as being shared, and you're only putting on paper the big picture items to let's make sure that we kind of get these out of the way now, so if we have a conflict, we can look back and say, see, we already agreed on that. If you had to do it for everything, you couldn't have a contract function. And so I think what's happened in our politics, in our culture, is we have had those broader assumed shared values start to melt, and now we're acting like you can still use the same kind of contract, even though we are no longer on the same page with each other on a bunch of stuff that didn't used to need to be in the contract. And it's not comfortable trying to put some of these things in the contract because they bring up a lot of like values that are no longer shared. And I'm not sure if that made sense, but to me, that's something like, I think what's become so challenging in our times now is like it's like the political realignments, the priorities, the way they've shifted for so many of us. I think that's part of what it is. It's like, oh shit, I thought we were on the same page about that. So if we're not on the same page about that, this contract doesn't make any sense anymore. Like, oh no, I assumed we were on the same page about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's people have a fleeting or no knowledge or understanding of first principles because they have no understanding of history and how they developed over time. That's my opinion on that. it's easy for a principle to turn into a platitude if context isn't there, right? And I think that's where we find ourselves today. And, you know, liberty, in the same way that masculinity provides the space and the form of safety and security for femininity and even society and civilization to function well, right? For like creators can't create without security. That's how it is. That's why Maslow's hierarchy of needs looks the way it does. In the same way that masculinity provides that to society, liberty provides the space for and safety as well for the functionality of the individual in society. You know what I mean? To get the best out of them, to get their pioneer spirit, their creativity, their moral ethics and things like that all come to fruition eventually because of what liberty provides, which is like design. I guess you could say that it's a social meritocracy in some regard, right? It's like I like the phrase "speak as if you know what you're talking about and listen as if you don't." And you can only
That's good. I like that.
You can only do that in a place where speech isn't penalized, right? And that's the core for me. The core of liberty is I begin with property rights. The ultimate right is property rights. The ultimate iteration of property rights is yourself, and the ultimate iteration of that is your speech and thought. That's why censorship is so evil. Not wrong, it's evil, right? Because you're trying to control what somebody thinks. Now, to your other point about how the division and how we've grown apart, some of it is natural, some of it is man-made, in my opinion, right?
Yeah.
But the metaphor I like is that we start up close and we whisper, and then we get a little farther apart and we start to speak in our normal voice, and then we get a farther apart still, and now we're yelling, and we get so far apart eventually that the only way we can reach each other is with bullets and bombs. And that's how that's how culture decays over time.
It's a good analogy. I really
think
like that.
I think culture really matters. You mentioned it, and I say this to something similar to people all the time. Culture is a shortcut. It's shorthand, right? We are creatures who evolved to discover patterns. That's what we do, right? Our brains are very complicated engines that distinguish between threats and benefits, and it's pattern recognition that makes that possible. Pattern recognition and context and history, not just our own, but like instinct that we inherit from our ancestors. And that's also what religion is, by the way. It is the contextualization of our shared moral code. You could call it mythology, you can call it stories, but the actual what we know today as religion was a spoken word tradition that were anecdotes about ethics 30,000 years ago, cavemen sitting around a fire, right? And it's developed into what it is today. So this is what makes it, again, you have to understand all this stuff to understand why it's important to maintain your own culture, right? It's not xenophobic, it's about survival, in my opinion.
Well, I'm almost through reading a book that had been recommended to me by a bunch of people, Tom Holland's Dominion.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
And he's tracing, frankly, liberty and human equality of dignity back to, Christendom, back to the claims that were fundamentally radical of Jesus Christ, and even in opposition to some of his Jewish brethren and the Pharisees at the time, that no, they're caste, class, we are all created in the image of God, and so that is the root of our equality. Our equality is metaphysical, and it's a metaphysical claim. And so the notion that I own myself and that property starts with self-ownership, that, and I agree with this, it stands on a metaphysical foundation because it is a claim that is not materially true historically. Slavery has existed on every continent, and has been, up until basically the West, and especially the Britain and America, been assumed to be good. It was assumed that there were greater and lesser types of people, and that there was no moral quandary whatsoever. And still to this day, if you go to other cultures, especially the Arab world, there's no moral quandary about greater and lesser people.
Sure.
That is not a universal kind of emergent epiphenomenon that we'll all just arrive at. It's like, no, if aliens come down from another planet and they can sort of scan the human behavior across the world, they won't arrive at Christian ethics. They'll arrive at something like blood and soil tribal conflict.
Yeah.
And so I think like the battles we have over our role as a citizen, over our freedom as Americans, that, like you said, there's a context there. That's Western civilization. It's Judeo-Christian values, which is like almost like a buzzword, but it has a meaning if you look into it deeply enough. And to me, so much of this and the battle, and where the battle has been lost, and if we want to win the war for freedom, we have to fight on this front, is how we raise our kids and how we educate our kids. Because I think those of us that believe in liberty have ceded the ground of the education of our kids to people who fundamentally despise this foundation. And they have been actively rewiring our kids' experience to be essentially tribal and barbaric in nature, root and branch. Like, you know, there are still colleges that on entrance, they will line you up based on the amount of melanin in your skin as part of an exercise in understanding your privilege. I mean, that is about as barbaric as you can possibly conceive. I mean, Swarthmore College has done that, has had the entering freshmen line up based on, I guess if you had a tan, maybe you got up the hierarchy or something that day. Like, where do I fit as an Italian American? Am I a little more privileged or less because I'm a little darker? But it depends on, you know.
Well, I guess it would be if you're from, if you're Sicilian or Italian.
Yeah, I mean, I got a lot of Sicilian, so I guess I'm maybe more less. Is it less privileged or more privileged? I can't even tell.
It's hard to say now. It's it really is. Yeah, I think that's the dumbest. It's so funny. We've talked about for 15 years now how sex and gender are social constructs, which is fucking stupid, right? I mean, that's one of the dumbest claims that I've ever seen. It really, if you try, this is another thing where you have to understand first principles, and I think if younger folks did, they would be immune to this type of rhetoric. If they understood that this all came out of this postmodernist movement with Jean-Michel Foucault, who was just trying to essentially erode any kind of moral value so that he could continue raping children across the world, because that's really what was going on, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And that's why it's important. Like, if you're hearing somebody moralize some issue or another, whether it be, you know, political or economic or social or whatever it is, I think it is relevant to see what kind of life they're personally living. Because are they just trying to justify their own shitty behavior, or is this real? You know what I mean?
Have you seen, there's a video, I think the professor's name was Derek something. If you go on YouTube and search Queer Theory Jeopardy.
Oh boy.
It's this professor, and he basically he's got just the camera on him. You hear some of the like radicalized students. I'll say children, because even though they're technically legal adults, they're acting like infants. Screaming at him in the back of the room. I see you. I see what you're doing. He's like, okay, let's play Queer Theory Jeopardy. And basically, so it's, you know, formatted like Jeopardy. But he basically points out that all the leading lights, Foucault, Butler, and others of this queer theory movement, in multiple ways, we're all trying to justify pedophilia. And you hear that and you think, is this some QAnon conspiracy? What are you talking about? And then he just pulls up the text and he just reads it. And it's really, it's the kind of thing that you don't really want to look at because it's so grotesque. And to come back to Tom Holland's book, the thing I'm starting to realize is, oh no, this has always been with us. It was commonplace in Roman households,
Greek and Roman, yeah,
for the men of the household to be able to have their way with the boys and the girls of that were under their sort of control as servants. That was common. It was not frowned upon. You wouldn't have thought anything of it if your neighbor was doing stuff that today should put you in a meat grinder. And so why should it be so outrageous to say that that force is still with us and it has taken on some new air in academia? You know, this is Marquis de Sade stuff. It's just Marquis de Sade repackaged a couple ways.
Yeah. It's just some asshole that wants to be a pervert, moralizing his perversion. You know, and it's not gone away either. Certainly, there's a lot of groomer bullshit going on in the U.S., but the U.S. is also the #1 global consumer of pedophilia material, right? But you know, there are still ritualistic customs like bachabazi in the Middle East.
I'm not.
It's where the men dress up the young boys like women or like little girls and have sex with them. It's still really common there. So we know, like, just from the stuff that's happening now, tracing it back to its roots in the ancient world, and then, you know, the postmodernist movement and what type of people they were, that this is all rooted in absolutely evil bullshit, right? So it makes you wonder, back to the race thing, that's the lowest frequency way to organize people. Race is a social construct more than gender will ever be. And if you don't
completely true.
If you don't believe that, look at the difference between I'm this isn't a judgment I'm making. And I make this same assessment a lot, actually. So you can look at Jay-Z on one side and Denzel Washington on the other. Very highly successful, very talented in their own fields, and wealthy beyond measure, but they don't come from the same culture, right? One of them grew up in a stable household, right? And had a strong father figure and became a strong father figure himself. The other one sold crack and became a rapper, right? And now he's certainly not doing that anymore, I wouldn't think, since he's a billionaire. But two people with the same melanin level from different places, completely different cultures, both successful, right? But those are, you wouldn't, it would be very low frequency of someone to group them together, because you're only doing it by the way they look, and that doesn't make any sense.
Well, it is barbaric, literally barbaric, to think you know much at all about someone from what you can judge across the room. I mean, this is the old tribal war paint hardware being put to use. Oh, you're coming over the hill, therefore from outside of our tent, bad. Therefore bad. That's how I'm going to operate. And it's very human, but to elevate that to being the best angels of our nature, it's like, well, I would just say that's satanic. I think that's just like that is literally the prince of lies at work. To make that a thing that is your founding principles of your philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, it's just caveman thinking. I mean, certainly every group of people historically throughout all of human history have worn some type of uniform, right? Now, sometimes they're not easy to see, but if you look closely enough, you'll find what the uniform is. There was a time certainly where it was race, although even Rome was pretty multiracial, right? The biggest empire in the history of the world became two empires, one of Greek and Roman descent, and the other one of Germanic descent, right? It's always kind of been like that. You would maybe a true and proper Roman might have been something they would have said back then, certainly to delineate between peoples, but. And certainly people from sub-Saharan Africa versus people from Northern Africa, right, at a time, that's two very different looking people. And now we're at a different point, though. We're at a point where it's not obvious, based on what someone's wearing or what their skin looks like, what their affiliation is or what they would consider themselves to be, right? So you've got to look quite a bit deeper to see who people actually are and what team they're on. And I don't think that... I think that's been a tough transition for people, right? Because our brains are wired for efficiency. They're also wired to detect between threats and benefits. We will always naturally gravitate towards people who look like us more. That's just how biology works, right? But,
birds of a feather flock together.
Sure, but that's not the way the world works anymore. And I just don't think we've necessarily caught up to that yet. I think that this is where it's hard to tell when you're in the middle of evolving, right? Especially socially, it's hard.
And whether evolving is possible, you want to believe it is. I don't know where I stand on this question of is our task to evolve or is our task to renew? Because maybe it's a mix of both. We have this technological layer of our experience in our society that we're technology has been the driving force of change fundamentally. If you think about it, like, we're talking about all this sexual depravity that wasn't depravity before. Well, but it's still with us. So you could say that the social evolution of that is like a broad recognition that slavery, subjugation, and exploitation of that kind is just fundamentally wrong, and that's an evolved sensibility. Can we keep evolving, or is that software reliant on a hardware platform that isn't going to change as much as we think, and we might not want to change it in the ways that come next, like augmenting it with things, like making ourselves into cyborgs so we can evolve to be like a disembodied mind. I know I'm getting off into weirdo land there, but that does feel like in some sense. You even see it in our politics right now, right? You've got Elon Musk, very much like a techno-futurist, who among his portfolio of companies involves one called Neuralink that's about plugging computers into the human brain and building an AI as fast as possible. Those two things are going to interact. And so that you got that thread, and you've got a much more traditional thread that's saying we need to go back to Judeo-Christian values and first principles, and put the family at the center of things. And those are like profound conflicts that for now are all on the same side in opposition to woke, pagan, barbaric nihilism. But there's still giant chasms inside of that opposition.
Yeah.
Yeah,
well, I mean, like, just on the dissociative part, our bodies are hardwired to touch each other, right? Handshakes, hugs, whatever the fuck. Are you familiar with the oxytocin hug? Do you know about this?
I know about oxytocin, but what's the oxytocin hug?
If you hug someone, like full frontal contact, as much front contact as possible, a hug with another human being, doesn't matter if it's sexual or not, that's not relevant. For 20 seconds, your body dumps oxytocin, right? It's designed to do that. For what purpose? That's what we should be asking ourselves. We're talking about evolving as a species, and people think that progressiveness means progress for its own sake, and that's not true, right? Because you eventually fall off the edge of a fucking intellectual cliff if you do that, right? I mean, that's what happens. We cannot allow that. So I think, is our task to evolve? No. Is it to renew? I think it is to renew, but I think it's also to refine, right? The mission statement for us are the collective principles and ethics that we've developed and tested over time that we know to be true, right? I think ethics are a social science. I think we are discovering what's right. And that's why you see the same general principles in all the different religions and philosophies of the world. It's not exact, but they're very close to each other, right? So I think we're chipping away, like when Michelangelo said he just removed all the pieces that weren't David. I think that's what we're doing right now. And when we say evolve, we should mean to get better at those things. Liberty and justice and kindness and all of that, right? The things that make... Because we're ants building an ant farm. We're here to make a well-functioning, civilized society. That's what we're here for, right? And I don't mean our purpose in the universe. I just mean this fucking meat sack right here. That's what it's supposed to be doing, so that we can get to all these other things. And it's this. If you think about it in that way, we are in a chain of succession, and sometimes are unaware of it. I think we've become unaware of it, whether intentionally or otherwise. Culture, society, and this is true of almost every civilization that's ever existed to some degree or another, was built on this premise that we borrow honor from the past. We talk about our ancestors. I mean, that's what religion and storytelling used to be. Even history used to be telling stories of our ancestors in anecdotes or parables that basically told us, here's why what we're doing is important, here's why your ancestry is important, and here are the right things to do as a human being. Whether they were right at the time or right always is a question to be asked. But we borrowed that honor from the past, and we lived our life in a way that our ancestors could borrow that honor from us again. And we felt compelled, duty-bound, and honor-bound to do that. If you ask a 17-year-old in 1950 what he was going to do with his life, I'm going to find a wife and have some kids, and I'm going to work my ass off and make sure my kids' life are better than mine. That's what the general answer would have been.
Yes.
If you ask a 17-year-old today, it will not be that answer, right? And that's because as you mentioned before, we failed these kids. And not to say they aren't coming back around. That younger generation is coming back around and making my generation look like a bunch of assholes right now.
Well, it's funny. So I have a 19-year-old son, and he's freshman in college, and we've taken unorthodox approaches to his education all along the way. But a couple of years ago, as a dad, I was thinking, well, as he ages, what is my job? And there's a couple things, right, that I think I can identify, and then there's a million others that I'm sure I can't. One, fundamentally, is my job is to be a good man. Mm-hmm. To be a good man, so that he can see what that looks like. And one of the most important places where he gets to see it is my relationship with my wife.
That's right. Everything a young man learns about how to treat women, he learns from how dad treats mom.
So I'm proud of my relationship, and I work at it, and it has never even occurred to me. And I had this modeled by my own father. It never even occurred to me the potential for divorce, which is partly why, I dated my now wife for 3 years before we got engaged. Although I like the feeling like this is the one. It was very much like right at the outset. It was like, oh, this is the one. But I sort of followed in my father's footsteps. My dad went out with my mom for 3 years before they got engaged. And so I have that privilege of having my parents stay together and see them go through a lot of hard shit, including especially the death of their parents, my father's own disability as a result of a drunk driving accident by someone else. And many other things, and still hang tough together, even when they're going crazy and screaming and yelling at each other at different points in their marriage. And so that is job number one to me. And then the other piece of the puzzle is that I have actively tried to mitigate against these stories in our polluted culture about what his future priority should be. And what I have more or less said to him is, look, you need to find a woman who fundamentally shares the most important values you hold, marry her, and have kids and raise them like that. And everything else will work itself out because you will end up going through lots of different careers. You will have things that you love, that you think this is the success hierarchy you want to climb. And you might even get to the top, and then you'll be like, oh, shit, I'm still bored. Now I'm bored. Like that happens to every successful person I know. So you can't root your identity and your purpose in those things. It needs to be about your relationship, your primary relationship, which will be your future wife.
Yeah.
And if you do that, you're going to be happy. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be perfect. You're not going to always be happy. Sometimes it's going to be hard. But that's it. And anyone that tells you anything else is the Prince of Lies, trying to confuse you and trying to tempt you with nonsense, with false idols, with hedonism. And I know I'm sounding very moralizing. Everybody like there's lots of experiments in living. There's a lot of paths to happiness. There's not one way, but there is an on average way that probably 90% of humans are satisfied to have, which is like the procreative, loving marriage.
Yeah.
That's
What do you think of the argument that a man should have the family, certainly, but prioritize success as well, because that's something that females find attractive? Like, it's part of the polarity and dynamic between masculine and feminine is that we give them the safety and security to, relax, raise children, blah, blah, blah. And they give us the energy and recovery period that we need after going to do fucking crazy bullshit, like going to war or starting business or whatever. And there's this argument that and it's not true of everybody, by the way, because there's A and B types in both sexes.
Sure.
But if you're both A-type people, that woman's going to want you to go pursue your ambition, because
100%.
that's important. Now, I always took... I'm a very ambitious and successful person. I've owned a bunch of businesses. We do all this stuff. But my priority, my priority is my woman, right? That's the thing, because I look at it the same way I look at my diet or my exercise or my just general health or my intellect. I have to take care of that thing because that's what makes me good at what I'm doing. And in the same way, if you think about it from that perspective, your home life is what allows you to decouple from the stress that you've experienced, recover in the same way that taking a day off working out helps your muscles recover, right? But this helps your social core and your soul recover. And if it doesn't, then you will always be functioning at less than 100%, right? So it's always been my opinion that you should absolutely prioritize the relationship. I'm not saying that you should not go do the thing that's going to make you successful to spend an extra hour with your wife that week. That might not be the best decision for both of you, right? But you definitely should spend as much time as it takes to make that relationship good.
I think that on a personal level, I'm an ambitious guy. I always have been. It's funny because my wife was asking me yesterday. I was like, how old were you when we bought our first apartment in Hoboken, New Jersey? And I was like, wait a second, 2004, blah, blah. I was 27. So at 27 years old, I was a creative director, producer at a major TV network in New York City, buying a $500,000 apartment. Barely scraping by because that was expensive, and even though I was making like low six figures, I was living paycheck to paycheck. So it wasn't like I felt like I was living high on the hog. I was like just starting to achieve something like what felt like adulthood. And this is in 2004 or 5, and then my son is born, and everything sort of shifts. But I think I've modeled ambition for my son, because I've also started multiple businesses, and I run an organization now that's got 20 plus people and blah blah blah. But the thing that's been interesting is that there's multiple threads there that you're pointing out. I think it's absolutely true that in general, on average, women want to be with men who are successful, and especially, honestly, more successful than them financially. I have seen relationships collapse where the wife in the relationship, the woman, is more successful than her husband. That is it's very unfortunate that that's the case. It's not always the case, but that tends to be destabilizing for reasons that I think are just very ancient.
I agree with that. I think also men haven't the vast majority of men, there's not a lot of resources for this, and men haven't figured out how to deal with that.
Well, it's a very profound structural disaster taking shape, right? Because we have a world in which you don't need to graduate college to be successful, but generally speaking, college graduation is a filter / marker of people who have the wherewithal to get through something stupid and move on to the next step. So it does correlate with success to some extent. And 60% of college graduates are female. And basically every metric, both Richard Reeves with his book and Warren Farrell with the boy crisis, and everybody's kind of starting to recognize this. We have a serious boy crisis, male crisis in our culture. That is fundamentally untenable. It is, it is like the most toxic combination imaginable. Let's have a feminism that tells our daughters that they don't need a man, that men are yuck, that men suck, and that they can live whatever life they want, which is great. That part, it's great. I don't have a daughter, but if I did, I'd want her to be successful on her own terms. Mm-hmm. But I would also tell her, it is success to become a really flourishing mother, like your mother, like my wife. That's a wonderful thing. That is a privilege to get to be a mother. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. They are spewing lies.
Well, that's the lie we tell young women, right?
Well, right.
That we tell them, we convince them that they are not on a biological clock, and they are. Now, it's easier for a man in his late 20s, early 30s to course correct. It's actually quite a bit easier because now you're making money and you're more attractive to younger women, right?
Oh yeah, you can easily. It's. I mean, if you think about like the age, my wife is actually 6 years older than me. But that's weird and rare. Most of the time, it's going to be the opposite, and for good reason.
3 to 5 years younger is typical.
Yeah.
Well, it's typical of a healthy relationship, anyways, right?
Well, and for obvious reasons, right? You think about it like, okay, as men, we take a little bit longer to get our shit together because we're kind of like giant apes, and we literally develop slower along some dimensions, socially and cognitively. If you are going to be in a position to be a protector and a provider, you need to be bigger, older, wiser, stronger. So, of course, it's going to be the case that we're going to, on average, be older than our wives. And that actually it's going to be the case that women will be attracted to older men. Those are facts. And so now we have a situation where the whole of the culture has tried to push back against these most basic facts. And what do you know? The most psychologically unstable and unhealthy cohort of people in America are politically liberal women.
Yeah. I mean, it's wild. It's like
that's a tragedy. That's not a dunk on the libs. Yeah. That's a signal of like social pathology.
It should make people very angry that that's the case, right? In the same way that if all of a sudden they started watering down gasoline and it's like no cars work anymore. It's like, well, we trusted you to do this thing.
I think they did this actually.
Yeah, for a while, yes,
yeah,
actually.
Yeah.
And now things aren't functioning the way they're supposed to, and we're all just like, hey, we trusted you to do this one thing, and you told us something that was antithetical to our survival, right? But it's not just that. It's been over and over again, from the American education system that Rockefeller and Ford imagined to produce compliant workers, right, to seeds and seed oils, grain, all this stuff, and the way that we medicate ourselves. You know what I mean? Like these weren't accidents or even negligence, right? So microplastics in metals, that's negligence in a lot of ways. But
and to some extent, it might even be necessary byproducts of things that were overall good, but now we've got it's cost benefit.
Yeah. And then, but creating a food pyramid and turning it upside down on purpose, that was not negligent. That was intentional. And, designing a sick care system, not a healthcare system that is designed to keep people, I guess, on the tit of big pharma for their entire lives in one form or another, was intentional. There wasn't an accident, right? And then telling people, when you look at that in its totality and you think about what's going on with not just how we're educating in classrooms, but what culture is telling people, what the dominant institutions in the country, secondary education, the media, politics, are telling people like, hey, you need to go do, like, to be equal to a man, you need to do what a man does. And that is fundamentally a lie. It's just simply not true. Right? That's like telling a point guard that he has to do the same thing that the center's going to do. It's not fucking true.
Well, it confuses the nature of that equality. And it comes back to the beginning of our conversation, right? It's like, if you understand that we are equal in our human dignity, then the notion that our goal needs to be material equality, first of all, it's ridiculous because it's impossible. Like it is not possible. So if the goal is material equality, you get guaranteed failure. Just that's a fact.
Well, you're describing equity, right? That's not. It's like
Right.
the dumbest of all the things that you could even want. Why would you want that?
No, nothing could even. It's funny. There's I'm an econ nerd, and one of the arguments of people who don't like capitalism, don't like free enterprise, they point to asymmetric information. Okay, well, some people have more information than others, and that's a flaw of the market. That's why we need government intervention. This is Joseph Stiglitz won the Nobel Prize for this shit. Okay, well, guess what? If I have a vision for a plot of land, and it's a vision that I have come up with in my mind, if I am forced to share that vision with the owner, it won't happen. Because that owner of the land, seeing my vision, which wasn't his, it was my vision, I came up with this vision, he will say, okay, now that I see what you're intending to do with it, I'm going to triple the price. So now the deal's not going to get done because he's essentially pre-extracted the opportunity, which means the opportunity never happens. You don't build the thing.
Yeah.
You don't buy the land and build the thing. So asymmetric information, or let's just say like uncertainty, insight, opportunity, inequality. Inequality is fundamentally essential because you can't have human action in a world where we're all basically flattened into a line. There is no reason to act. No one would act. So even at like the most abstract theoretical level, communism and all of its cousins doesn't fucking work. It's never worked, not because it's good in theory but not in practice. There is no theory of communism that works. It just doesn't work. All of that stuff's just communism. It produces hell every time because it doesn't work in theory. And the fact that our education system, if you go into any standard college and survey the professors, depending on the department, you get anywhere from 30% to a majority call themselves Marxists. That means you're all fired. Like, you're all fired. The university is supposed to be a place in pursuit of truth, and you literally have adopted an ideology that is provably false and that we have 100 million dead bodies to lay at its feet, and you still adhere to it. And this is just one aspect of the pathologies that, like, I think only like fat and happy society could possibly like entertain this stuff.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, there's no reason to act in an equitable society. I think that's a pretty good standard to hold. And it's also why I don't think a lot of people in media creation, and this is your background as well, are very concerned about AI, and I am not, right? Because I don't think AI can ever do what creative people can do, because they're sampling on the dependent variable of what creativity actually means at its root, right? So it is not that it's simply well, like if AI was all of a sudden capable of writing the best novel that existed, for example, still there would have to be an audience for it. One, people would have to actually care. So what is it that makes people care? Well, I mean, there's a general interest, right? But people care about the things that are near to them, or things that they know about already, or something that's new, the kind of, we call it affinity-based marketing, something that intertwines, I guess, with something that you already have an established relationship with. The easiest version of that is other people, right? So you might be able to go onto some website and produce in a few minutes a bespoke novel just for yourself to read. It will have no meaning until you share it with another person, right? And AI just can't, it'll never be able to replace that functionality. The reason that something is important is that we can share it with other people. And it's the reason that thing that we're sharing is meaningful is because it's new and different. Otherwise, what the fuck are we even talking about, right? So I don't think AI will ever be able to produce stuff like that. It'll certainly be a great assistant, right? It'll be a great assistant in creative stuff, I think. And we're seeing that already with some of the digital applications, Sora on music side, Sora on
I forget the music
on the video
one.
side, whatever the music is.
Suno, I forget. But
Yeah, there's a couple. There's something Dreamer too that YouTube is using now as an AI model. Liberia, Lycia or something like that. I can't remember what it is, but those will be things eventually. But it's what it is the shareable nature of something, right? This is how we've evolved when it comes to consuming content, right? We were sitting around a campfire listening to some old dude tell a story, and then we were sitting around a radio listening to C.S. Lewis, serialized Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, and then we were sitting around the TV listening to the president talk, and then now we share memes on the internet, right? It's the same thing, the same different iterations, but the same premise over and over and over again, right? And it'll never change.
Well, I think it is interesting. I have always been like a techno optimist. I believe in innovation. I believe in very, very, very much so. I love adopting stuff. We use all the AI tools like crazy. It is the first time I've had more concern than zero about the impacts. And I think the reason isn't that it's going to create beautiful art and displace art. It's more that I think I think the path to being creative is like every other human struggle. I like to say that there's this meme about the creative process, that you have an idea and you think this is going to be awesome, and then you start working on it and it sucks at first, and you're like, ooh, this is shit, and then you start to turn inward and say, well, maybe I'm shit. And then if you can cross that Rubicon and you're not shit. And even if you are shit at first, the way to not be shit isn't by just simply not being shit. You have to work at it. And then eventually it's like, oh no, this is actually pretty good. And then if you stay at it long enough, you get back to this is awesome, or this is even better than I thought it was going to be. Or maybe it's not as good, but it's better than. But that process, that through the valley of death process, is has repeated itself a million times for me, and I think it is the creative process, and it does take a kind of discipline and a kind of and I think it comes with experiencing it to be good at that, to stay at it, to be an artist. Like Michelangelo didn't simply appear and have the vision of David and know to cut away the rocks. He spent a life devoted to creating that craft. And there is something to be said for the short-circuiting the next generation of creativity. And I think we will. This is a question of adapt, evolve, refine. What does that look like? What is creativity in the decades to come going to look like? But you raise an interesting question, which is, what will happen and is already starting to happen in a world where some of the things that used to be hard are easy. Where the visual effects of The Lord of the Rings is now one text prompt away. And one thing that could be the case is we might be heading towards a world where the thing we value most is an in-person experience again.
Well,
fundamentally,
kids are going back to 16-bit graphics with Roblox and fucking Minecraft, and they are getting together and watching other people play games in the room together, and not even playing the games themselves. Right. So yeah, it's absolutely what's happening.
Yes, and
we'll always, as a species, we'll always have to come back to that, right?
Yeah, it's love is fundamentally, as a concept, and as an experience, it is fundamentally in relation, right? You know, I'll get off on the edge of my skis with my Catholicism. Like, if you're Catholic or Christian and you believe in the Trinity, the premise there, as I understand it, is that God is love, which is like the most basic thing that like Paul says, and that is like that's like and the message of Christ. Well, the Trinity is the idea that, you know, God is love means God exists in relation, because love is in relation. Love is not like a platonic form. Love doesn't exist unless there's at least two people to experience the love between each other. And so I do believe fundamentally that the most like the base level truth of reality is love. That is the thing. Like, if that is not the thing you're striving to have in your life, you're fucked. Yeah. And if that's true, then that means that we fundamentally need to be in relationship, and that is where happiness is. And it's the reason why even prisoners have a place worse than prison, and it's called solitary confinement. You know, we don't even remain sane. Our brains can't function without being in relation to other people. Yeah. Yeah. And I think I think like we're getting to like stare that abyss in the eyes, and it's looking back on us, and and I think we have to figure out, how do we not fall into it?
I think we're gonna see. We were just talking about this on the other show yesterday. My buddy Ian was talking about how we're gonna see some bifurcation in society, and these people that are bought in to the new experience, to me, it's anti-human experience. That's the addict of the next generation. That instead of fentanyl addicts walking the streets, sleeping outside, we're gonna have people in like group homes hooked up to hardware. That'll be the new addict. That's what I think. And you know, to bring it back to the other part, the options when things get easier are to either find new hard things or become mentally and emotionally and physically weak. Those are the only two options, right? Which is why, you know, we go through these cycles. Even before technology became what it became, we had already gone through this cycle where now we live indoors with electricity and running water, so we go camping as a hobby. Something that we used to have to do to stay alive, we now do as a hobby, right? Because we want that. Right. We want that challenge. And to tie it in with the love part, people have this general notion of, and even inside the military, it's happened over the years, that we fight wars because we hate the enemy, right? And this is not true, right? And that these time periods where we've gone through, where dehumanizing the enemy is part of basic training or part of training in general, have been cataclysmic. They've produced reckless and unprofessional barbarism instead of good soldiering, typically, right? We fight because we love the country and our families, and to the soldier, the way it you internalize that is that anybody that believes in this cause of liberty is a member of my family, at least for this time, right? We can argue later about other stuff, but right now, while the bullets are flying and the bombs are going off, get behind me, right? That's the thought process. And you'll see people, I've watched dudes run into hails of gunfire to get their buddies out. You don't do that because you hate the enemy. It's just not true, right? And if it happens like that in that extreme situation, what can we learn from that to apply back to our normal lives?
You know, what you're reminding me of is a book that my son read in 7th grade because he was going to Acton Academy here in Austin. Jeff Sandifer is a dear friend, Jeff and Laura.
Is that the one?
He was at the original
Springs.
In the original Acton is up on like Alexander and.
Okay. There's one over here in Dripping Springs.
There's a ton of them now. There's actually like hundreds of them around the country, and at least 150 are in Texas. Very sort of like Montessori on steroids, like Socratic Montessori. Tim Kennedy's got an Acton-inspired thing called Apogee.
Yeah, he's a good buddy of mine.
Yeah. So, but he read this book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Everybody should read it.
And I thought I read it because he read it and it like transformed him. It turned him into a little stoic. And then he read Meditations, and those two books have shaped him quite a bit. And I realized I was like, you know what? I think maybe I didn't read this book So last summer I read it, and my God, if that's not the book of our times. You know, the first half is Viktor Frankl, so the Jewish psychologist, survives the worst of the Holocaust, like into all of the camps, watches his family murdered. And he asks this question: what is the search for meaning, and how did people in that circumstance survive? Like why did some people hold on to their humanity and escape and survive? And I think that is, it's not hatred of the Nazis.
No.
It was a belief in a purpose that was ultimately in the service of others, which again to me comes back to love. Like you can't hate corrupts you. Hate is, you're not gonna win a war with hate.
No, I can't.
I mean, maybe you can if it's just about pushing a button to drop a nuke on your adversary, but will you even win that war at the end of the day?
Well, you got to ask yourself what it means to win a war, right? To me, and this is something that I've said before as well, but to me, the most moral thing you can do in war is win it, right? Because you should operate from the premise that we're not going to start one unless it's a real situation. And so the most moral thing you can do is actually win the war. But from a citizen soldier's perspective, what does it mean to win? It means that my civilization gets to continue. That's it, right? And thrive as well, right? There's actually a story about this. I guess circumstance that you're talking about in the film Conspiracy. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's Kenneth Branagh and a bunch of other people. It's about the final solution meeting with Eichmann and Reinhard Heydrich. But one of there's a psychologist or something that was part of the party that tells the story about this man who grew up in an abusive household. His dad just relentlessly beat him his entire life. But he was very close with his mother and just became angrier and angrier, and it drove him. It was the only thing he ever thought about was how he hated his father. And then his mother died, and he just kind of stood at the side of her coffin and felt nothing. You know what I mean? Because he had been so consumed by hate. And then when his father died, later on, several years later, he completely fell apart and wept uncontrollably because he had allowed everything good in him to be consumed by the hate, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned, you almost quoted Gandhi a second ago, if you want to truly find yourself, lose yourself in the service of others. Meaning, every meaningful thing you do in life will be in the service of other people. And it's just the way that we were designed, right? It's not, that isn't, in my opinion, that's not a moral statement. That is just an observation of reality. And I think more of that is necessary to stop thinking of our relationship with the world, with the state, government, whatever the fuck you want to call it, as some sort of contract. I don't think that's what it is. I think we are discovering things that are true. And something is either true or it is not true, right? And it can be true now and not true later. That's certainly possible, right? Like the farther you get away from the first principle, the grayer things will become, and we should expect that, right? That's why, Lukanov and Jonathan Haidt talk about to train your child for the road. Don't try to train the road for your child. You can't do that, right? Yeah,
the coddling of the American mind. That's a huge input into even what I do with our show, with our Dad Saves America show. We have, I think, in some ways, a kind of autoimmune disease, and that is, there is all these things that are costs: pain, discomfort, suffering, waiting, being disappointed, not getting the thing you want right away. Those are costs. And in the pursuit of eliminating them, we've thrown out the baby with the bathwater, not realizing that those costs themselves had essential benefits, that it was actually incredibly beneficial to have boredom in your life, to have struggle that was survivable struggle, so that it would teach you that you can survive struggle in general, repeatedly. And when you don't have it, it turns out you don't even know that you can.
Yeah.
And it just makes you it makes you fragile instead of anti-fragile. And this is Nassim Taleb, which I'm sure you know, like this premise that the human creature is an anti-fragile creature, that we get stronger through our bumps and bruises. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger is a scientific statement.
Yeah.
It is a fact of the nature of man. And like autoimmune disease, one thing that's interesting I came across years ago was that there's been some success in treating alopecia and allergies and all these autoimmune diseases by reintroducing worms. I think Johns Hopkins has done studies on this. It isn't like a solution because worms have their own problems. They're parasites. But the theory was that our immune system co-evolved in an environment that included parasites such that its weapons were designed to fight these things.
Well, a lot of parasites are symbiotes, right?
Right. And so in taking them away and deworming and creating this clean and sterile environment, we have hardware that is now doesn't know what target to aim for, and so it aims on itself. And that's one theory about what autoimmune disease is. Well, I think the same thing has happened with the way we've raised our kids, the way society is created, or with the kind of culture and society that has emerged out of our wealth, our relative prosperity, our protection by our oceans, the fact that wars don't come to our shore. We send our men and women off, and it's all looks like a video game. And we bear no, like the last time that you felt it culturally was Vietnam, and where you had tens of thousands of body bags coming back. That's the last time that's happened, and that all just seems like Call of Duty to Americans.
Yeah.
And I think that is, it turns out, I mean, I hope we don't have to go through world wars, but there is something about the lessons of the costs of life that you can't escape, and they'll come back one way or another.
Yeah, and the longer you wait to absorb that lesson, the more brutal the lesson becomes, typically, right?
It's like forest management.
Yeah,
You can either have
essentially,
occasional brush fires, or you can let the brush build up and have a burn it all down catastrophe.
And it's really mostly about just accepting and recognizing reality, right? What is fundamentally true versus what is not. For example, you mentioned reintroducing parasites. Half of the cells in your body are bacteria that are not human cells. One half. Right. There's a 1-to-1 ratio, about 30 trillion human cells and 30 trillion bacteria cells in your body. That's how that works. Which makes you wonder what you are, right? This meat sack. But the other fundamental truth that I think that we get, farther away from is that between you and what you want is pain, some kind of pain, whether it comes in the form of effort, literal pain, social pain, intellectual, I feel like an idiot right now, like you described before, the creativity part, those roadblocks and getting over them, that's what ingenuity is, right? We think about it in terms of literal engineering, like, oh, all of a sudden I figured it out, and I'm Lena Headley, and I wrote the formula for frequency hopping radios on the back of a cocktail napkin, and I have no formal mathematics training. You know what I mean? But that is what it is. It's taking the time to sit with the thought and allowing yourself to find different avenues around it, right? And it's no different than sifting through sand for gold flakes. It's no different than we both mentioned Michelangelo chipping away pieces of marble to make a statue. There's no way to bake a proper French loaf of bread without proving it first, without letting it rise. That's how it works, right? And there are no shortcuts to that. You just have to let it happen.
Yeah, that was the word that was coming to my mind. There's no shortcuts for sure.
The process of all this chips away the chaff, right? It chips it away so that you get a good final product. And that's true in every facet of life. Anytime you try to take a shortcut around that, you are going to get an inferior product. And when you map that onto your personal life, your social life, when you try to take those shortcuts, the inferior product you get is your life. That should be unacceptable, right? And it's not that much work. It's just being intentional about what you're doing. That's literally all you have to do.
One of the things that I think is like a superpower that we all have and we all forget, and all of us, myself included, is that we overestimate how much we can change others and we underestimate how much we can change ourselves. And what is so important about that is when you take responsibility for your own agency, you realize how often the challenges you're facing can either be easier or harder based on your mindset. And this is especially true in relationships and in your marriage. When you're in a fight, I remember there was this radio show called Radio Lab, and they did an example of this. When you get into an argument with your wife, or with anybody, but let's just focus on your wife, and the physiological things that come with stress and antagonism kick in. Your heart rate rises, your temperature changes, maybe your palms get sweaty, your muscles stiffen. All those things happen, and you're in this fight. You're in a fight or flight mode. And then you resolve it, or you get to the place where it's like we're no longer being productive anymore. And there's this interesting thing, and this Radio Lab show actually did a recording of it, and you heard it happen. So your minds resolve. Okay, yeah, we're in agreement. And then your body doesn't instantly shut all that shit off. So, and I think we've all experienced this if you have any kind of relationship. Your mind's done. Okay, great. We're in agreement or something. My heart rate's still
there's still adrenaline.
There's still adrenaline coursing through my veins. My heart rate's still elevated, and you can restart the fight. And you hear it happen in this radio show. I've done it myself. Like this. Oh, but what about this? Or yeah, but you know what? Did you always do this? Like you go to these absolutist statements, and I think that
add no value.
They add no value. It's self-defeating, and I think one of the things that you can do is if you can have the mantra that I have control of myself. How I react is my responsibility. This is a part of man's search for meaning. It is up to me to decide whether something is suffering or not. That is a superpower, because that is a way of shutting off that feedback loop that's fundamentally unproductive, and being a full human and not just a reactionary animal.
Well, it's also what it means to be a man, right? Like as a man, the first thing you should master is yourself. Don't go take masculinity classes or study this philosophy or that one until I'm not saying you can't do them concurrently, but the main goal you should have is to be able to master yourself, right? That's why the Stoics are so important. It's because it teaches you in very practical terms how to master not just your reactions to things, but also the way that you think about stuff, right? Thoughts have this odd way of becoming reality. And I don't know if there's some kind of metaphysical thing going on there, or if it's just the self-fulfilling prophecy or whatever it is. But in life, you can control your attitude and your effort, and very little else, typically, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And the interesting part about it is, and the part that I wish more people would realize, is that one thing affects the other. These two things that you can control affect one another. If you go into any situation with a shitty attitude, it's going to make it worse. And it's not just worse, but more difficult for you, right? Which is the effort part. And then being lazy or having a lack of willpower, or whatever it is going to eventually produce a nihilistic attitude, right? Like I'm sure if anybody that's ever done any of these research projects, like the group psychology of the workplace, when things are going poorly, everybody thinks they're the only one doing any work, and it's never true, right? Usually it's bad leadership and inefficient processes, right? That's usually what it is. It's because somebody who's in that position isn't doing their job to make things functional. But everybody, and that's why if you go into a workplace and it's miserable, fire the manager immediately. That's almost always the problem. And again, the first thing you got to master is yourself. So you have to understand that stuff to your core. And you mentioned it. Realize that you're responsible for it. I'm responsible for how, in the same way that I'm responsible for showing up dressed in the appropriate uniform, whatever it happens to be, I'm responsible for showing up with the right fucking attitude. And that includes every conversation you have with your wife. Every single one of them.
You know, one of the things that I experienced that I had not heard anybody really articulate until it happened to me is when my son was born. Because I was an ambitious guy, because I was climbing the corporate ladder inside of a very competitive industry at the time. And my wife and I were both ambitious. We met at work. We met at Nickelodeon, the kids network, where we were sort of rising stars there. When my son was born, the thing that was so crazy was that I completely lost myself for about 6 months in my just love and excitement and awe of becoming a dad and having this new life. And when work lost its flavor. It was kind of like when you have like a sweet tea, but you eat really rich chocolate and the sweet tea tastes like water. And when I recalibrated and sort of got back into a groove and sort of sort of rebalanced, I realized something. And it took me about a decade, I think, to appreciate this. Is that he totally liberated me. And he liberated me from the only real chains that matter. And that is the chains of my own mind and my own ego. Because what I realized was, what happened was, there is now a person in my life that I will truly, and this was certainly true from my relationship with my wife, but your children take it to a different level. I would give everything away. I would make myself a pauper in a heartbeat if it saved my son or put his life on a better trajectory. And what that did was it put everything else in its proper place. And it fundamentally de-risked every other ambition in my life. Because
what's the worst that can happen?
What's the worst that can happen?
Right. Which is a very good attitude to have, by the way.
It is liberation. And I never imagined myself being an entrepreneur. I really didn't. I was sort of like a craftsman. I liked producing videos, and it wasn't until my son's birth and that liberation that it was like, I could quit this job. I could move to Texas with my wife and start a totally weird business to try to basically make sort of conservative content, which was back in 2011. And what's the worst that could happen? It fails? Who fucking cares?
Yeah, I'll do something else.
I'll go work at a construction site. I love that. I would be perfectly happy.
I mean, but in the same way that what masculinity provides to women in civilization is the safety and security part, that's what they give to us, the woman and child. That's what they give to men. And I think that's something that people see it sometimes as a weight around their neck. It's like, no, you had that could not be further from the truth. That is a sickness in your head. You got to get rid of that shit. Having
family, having kids especially, will set you free in ways that no one. I mean, if I have one message, it's that there is political liberty, there is external liberty, there is the freedom from coercion, oppression, constraints, obstacles. That's the freedom from. That's a classical liberal freedom, John Locke freedom. But the freedom to, the best way to think about the challenge of freedom to, do I have the freedom to pursue, to risk, to strive? Most of that ends up being internal. And I think that this is why married men have higher life satisfaction. Married men make more money. Married men with kids are happier, are better men.
Yeah.
And I think the people out there in the manosphere who try to denigrate marriage, denigrate women, denigrate the sacredness of that relationship, they're lost.
Oh, yeah.
They're lost, and they don't understand or they're damaged and they're bringing their damage to the table.
It's just nihilism. It's not new and it's not cute. These guys call themselves Sigma males. A Sigma male is a man who stands up when no one else will. Not a man who takes his ball and goes home because he's butthurt. That's a coward that does that, right?
Damn right.
All of these people are fucking cowards. I have no time for any of that nonsense. I don't even entertain it anymore. And if anybody mentions it to me, I'm just like, nope, move along. Move on to the next thing, because I don't need to hear about some weird anti-humanist cult, because that's what it is, right?
I think that the one of the challenges we face, we're at this interesting moment where I wish our politics didn't play as big a role in our culture, but actually in many cases that's silly, because politics has always been a big part of culture. It's endemic to it.
It's downstream of it typically, right?
Well, it's interesting. It's downstream of it, and it's also in a feedback loop with it.
Now it's in a feedback loop for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's. I think that I was talking with my producer Tim about this before I came by, because we were always talking about shit like this. Is that like that Breitbart quote, "Politics is downstream from culture." Was maybe more true for a better time when politics played a smaller role in the American life than it does now. Yeah. But we have a moment right now that I think is very real, partly because of the Trump's success in the face of everything that was thrown at him and his standing up to a bullet. I think that was non-trivial. That will be in the history books. And I think the challenge we face for those of us that love liberty, that believe in classical virtues, that believe in healthy masculinity, I love this conversation because you and I, we met just now for this, and it's like we're on the same page on this 100%. We have to lead. We have to do our part to lead the young men who are at the margin towards the good and away from, frankly, forces that do look a little like fascism. I'm not gonna lie. That some of the darkness in reaction to all the noxious woke commie poison, you can become what you despise. Your enemy can shape you, and I think it's on us as real men to point the way towards that unified, forceful, sword in the sheath, ready to be used, but not swung around like a child type of masculinity. Yeah,
that chest thumping stuff is for the birds, man. I just don't like, especially as somebody who's been in quite a bit of war. When I see people out there chest thumping who haven't been, I'm like, what are you doing, man? Like that. This is all for effect, right? Where's the substance in any of this? And it's and it's what happens. This stuff is what happens when you become more guided by hate than love. That's just how it happens, right? Like you become a nihilist. You have to become a nihilist. You have to become a contrarian. Like, oh, nothing will ever work out. What are you, fucking Eeyore? Grow up, dude. Like, certainly you don't have to be Tigger all the time, but you can't be Eeyore, for fuck's sake, ever. Like, you can't ever allow that. You can be Tigger sometimes. It's good to be crazy motivated about stuff, but you should never allow yourself to become Eeyore.
That's my favorite reference of the conversation. Don't be Eeyore. Oh, that's so true.
Well, you were at Nickelodeon before, I think, right? So it's at least semi-relevant. Not that they were ever on Nickelodeon, but children's programming for sure.
It is. It was in the before times, before children's programming turned into the battleground for queer theory.
Jesus Christ.
Right. It is. It comes back to that sense of agency, right? Like whether or not you see the world as half full or the glass is half full or half empty is a choice you make every day. Mm-hmm. And as far as I know, we are on this mortal coil once, and then we go somewhere else. And I have no time for nihilism. Why would I want any portion of my life to be dedicated to believing it doesn't fucking matter? That is about the stupidest, most self-defeating posture to voluntarily adopt. I mean, that is like not even welcoming Trojan's horse into your castle. It's welcoming the barbarian hordes into the castle of your mind.
Yeah.
And saying, yes, please come conquer me. Allow me to be defeated. Fuck that. I'm not doing that.
I can't understand it. I mean, certainly we all have to deal with intrusive thoughts from time to time, right? But some of it is, based on, we mentioned before, childhood, Brett Weinstein, Heather Haying wrote a good book about it. The Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century is really good about exposing your kids to lower level risk, just what you were talking about before, so they understand that they can move past that risk, right? And not be consumed by it. This rise in anxiety is only because there's a good parallel for it, and it's peanut allergies.
Yes.
So 3 kids in the 90s were allergic to peanuts in all of America. And we're like, well, no more peanuts. And now every kid is allergic to fucking peanuts. In the same way, if you coddle your children, they will turn out to be fragile. And what good have you done them by shielding them from minor trauma as a child when they're going to see everything as trauma as an adult, right? Like that's how you learn to contextualize the world.
I think one of the things, in some respects, it is the ultimate weaponization of one of the things that has made humans so survivable in so many different climates, and that is that we are the most adaptable creature ever. And that adaptation goes in multiple directions. And one of the ways it turns out we adapt is we adapt with increasing sensitivity to subtler and subtler environments. And so if you can get along in a world that involves a fair amount of actual distress and bullying and hazing and getting made fun of, which is to say, can you get along in a world in which you have multiple siblings?
Yeah, no shit.
Well, then it turns out that you know the difference between speech and violence. And if you don't, if you've never experienced hurty words, or if you've never experienced, getting beat up at any level, well, you adapt to that more calm, sterile environment. And next thing you know, speech becomes violence because the discomfort of speech relative to your protected bubble boy tranquility feels like an absolute assault.
Yeah.
And so that is the thing. We can adapt towards being more resilient or towards being more fragile, but it is the same. I think it's the same human proclivity to adaptation that is at the center of it.
Yeah.
And but the difference being, one makes you more and more anti-fragile and more and more capable of taking on the real challenges of reality, and one sets you up to basically be extinguished. That road towards fragility, towards speech is violence, and no, in fact, not only speech, silence is violence too.
Oh yeah. So it's not enough to be not be racist. You have to be anti-racist.
Yeah, you have to be
fuck you.
You have to be anti-racist, which turns out is actually just racist.
Yeah.
But it's a lot like a kind of psychological cultural monocropping. A diversity of plants and rotation of grazing animals gives rise to hardier soil with more minerals and more robust ecosystems. And if you just sort of strip it all bare and lay rows of soybeans, what do you know? One nasty pathogen wipes the whole fucking thing out.
Yeah.
And it's the same, we're all made from the same fundamental stuff in that regard.
Yeah. And we're bioengineered for that as well. So if you during fertile periods for women, they are more attracted to the typical broad-shouldered man, right? But during the 3 non-fertile weeks, it's called the T-shirt test, by the way, if you want to look into it. They would have a dude wear a T-shirt for an afternoon, not wash it, and then the woman would pick the one that smells the best, and typically it would be the most biodiverse, the one least like herself, right? That's how we're hardwired to operate, typically. When you're actually in your fertile period, when it's at its peak, you take those into consideration, but also the best possible mate for safety, security, all that shit. And a lot of this is just, again, about recognizing what reality is. You go play an NBA basketball game on your PlayStation, and then go try to play it in real life and see how that goes for you, right? It's going to be quite a bit different. So when people say And a lot of people just say it mockingly now. But when they say go touch grass, I think there is fundamental truth in that. And it's not to literally go outside, although you should go outside plenty, right? Especially in the morning and in the evening before the sun goes down. But it's not just about going outside. It's not just about getting off of technology. It's about having a connection with fucking reality. Because none of this other bullshit, Twitter is not a real place. People fucking lose their minds, delete their accounts, and in some cases lose their minds or kill themselves because of being bullied on the internet. I can literally just close this, right? And that's not that you only learn that if somebody fucking teaches it to you, right?
Whenever I'm home, when I'm not traveling, I usually walk 2 to 4 miles a day in the morning before I start my day, and with my little dog.
What kind of dog is it?
It's just like a little Cavalier poodle. It's like it looks basically like a permanent puppy stuffed animal.
Yeah.
It's the cutest thing in the world.
I've got Boston Terriers.
So like, you know, and I've worked her up from walking a mile to walking up to 5. And if I got to carry her, sometimes I do. But what's so great about that? I live in a neighborhood that's on average older, and I walk down the street. I know my neighbors. I talk to them. Some are Democrats, some are Republicans. And you see like, oh yes, in reality, we actually get along just fine.
About 80%. We agree on about 80% of things, which should be enough for fuck's sake, man.
Yeah, right.
Jesus Christ.
If that's not Pareto optimal, I don't know what
My
the
God.
fuck is. But it's like we get on, and you just can't. There's all the things we can talk through about why that's important, and then there's probably 100-fold things that we don't have any clue about that's essential to that, including probably crazy metaphysical stuff about just the proximity, the energy of life and needing to be in proximity to other living creatures.
I mean, we're walking batteries, you know, for lack of a better phrase. So certainly we're throwing energy all over the place. Yeah, it's why one of my favorite maxims that I talk about when we're talking about political division is that it's hard to hate up close. You can put people like take a MAGA Republican and a progressive Democrat and don't tell them who each other are and put them in an Amazon warehouse and doing something difficult. Like you got to work hard today. You're going to work 10 hours a day and we're going to pay you a bunch of money for it. Those two people will not fight. They just won't. Right? Regardless of how disparate their opinions are, because right now the point is just to get this work done, and we have to help each other get it done. Right? It's hard to hate up close, and when you dissolve all these things, like how you feel politically about something shouldn't have an effect on me. Right? It shouldn't. Like we can certainly disagree about it, but it shouldn't have an effect on me, and it does. We allow it to.
I think that one of the interesting challenges, like philosophically, is, you know, we started off this conversation talking about liberty. And I think liberty can very easily be understood as radical individualism. Self-ownership, don't tread on me, a kind of libertarian ethos. And I think in large measure it is. But it can't have any meaningful existence or even utility in a vortex disconnected from human connection and community.
That's what gives it context.
It is. That is
right.
In
the same way that hot gives cold context.
It's the boat. Like if liberty is a boat, it is designed for social water, for water, the ocean.
That's the medium.
Is the community,
Okay.
is the ability to live together.
I like that.
In harmony, in some measure, and I think I think it's actually maybe a seed of disaster that was planted in the Enlightenment and in the move towards treating everything like it's physics and like it's a Cartesian science experiment. And that's not the human condition.
No. We didn't evolve that way, so it's not going to be the human condition. Whether it's physically like a true part of the physical universe or not, that doesn't really matter. We should definitely know that it's true or not. and observe and behave as if it were true, but we can't behave as if that's the only truth, because it's not.
No, so you can't. Yeah, so if you believe that the pursuit of truth with a capital T is essential to being sane and having a meaningful life, you have to look at the human being for what we are, and what we are is complicated, and we have, like you said right from the start, we have freedom. But we also have duty and responsibility. And we also have these other things that are messier, like loyalty, that require us to be in relationship to other people and have that be functional and be healthy and be enriching. And I don't expect computers to replicate this. I don't expect humanity to get uploaded to some singularity and all be I don't think consciousness works that way. I have no expectation that it does. I don't think what we're creating is consciousness with these computers. It's something else. And, I think if anything now we have this interesting moment where it's more important than ever to get back to the kind of education, the kind of understanding that frankly used to be what it meant to be educated.
Yeah.
It used to be that by 13, you spoke and wrote in Greek and Latin, and you knew the Western canon because that's what it meant to be educated. And so you got loaded in as basic knowledge, where we came from.
And these things didn't happen in like a school classroom typically. Right.
No, they were in one-room schoolhouses / your home farm with your mother reading the great books with you. Yeah. This bureaucratized Prussian prison / factory work scheme called public school is antithetical to all that.
It is, yeah.
And so for me, and I know I'm gonna have to get going in a minute, but that to me is like the action steps that we all can take that are tangible coming out of a conversation like this. It's like, as an adult, I'm like revisiting all this. I'm enriching, I'm trying to fill the gaps in my own understanding of our history so that I have that context, and every day I'm learning something new.
Yeah.
And for my son, that's the kind of education I've tried to arm him with. And now as he enters into like young adulthood, I'm like, look, the tools you're going to need, the only tools you actually need are moral discernment. Are you conscientious? Do you know what it means to like see something through to the end? And do you know what's right and wrong? And do you have that discernment sort of developed and developing? If you have those things, you can fucking do whatever you want. Yeah, I don't care. You can work in a construction site. You can work in a call center. You can be the CEO of a fucking company. That's up to you.
Yep.
But those are the forces. That's our charge now.
Yeah, I agree. Great show. Tell everybody where they can find you.
Well, the best place to find me is on YouTube at youtube.com/dadssavesamerica. We also, host the website dadssavesamerica.com, which is a Substack. So if you like this and want to get more of it, you can head there and subscribe. We publish every week. And if I'm a little spicier on Twitter, just at my handle, John Papola. So
good. I like spicy.
I'm not the best version of myself necessarily.
Well, what are you gonna do?
But it is what it is.
Well, thanks for coming today. I appreciate the time. Very good conversation. We'll do it again sometime.
Awesome, man.
And thank you all for listening to this episode.